In your view, what role do zoos play in the United States, and what role does education play with the public with zoos today?
I think zoos play the same kind of role wherever they are if they're good zoos, or they should do. And in the US, I've seen this huge change in zoos over the years. And gradually, people are beginning to understand that animals aren't happy in small, bleak cages with cement floors and iron bars. So we're seeing more naturalistic habitats. And the more that this happens, the more the zoo can play a role in education, because people can get some idea of how the animal behaves normally. That's because the zoos are appreciating the kind of social group the animal should live in, the kind of things it needs to perform at least some of its natural behaviors. And so, you know, the role the zoo can play in education is huge if it does it right, because it can educate people to the fact that in the wild, animals are vanishing, and this is how wonderful these animals are, so let's get together and stop them vanishing.
As you know, the mandate for zoos and aquariums in the United States is primarily to be a conservation organization. Are they fulfilling that mission well, in your mind?
Some are, some aren't. There's a big difference, and I'm not going to go into all the names. One thing, I can't remember them, but the zoos that are playing a major role are, you know, raising this public awareness, and they're also raising funds. They also have programs in the zoo, things like captive breeding and various kinds of, well, they have programs with frogs to try and breed the endangered ones in captivity while they learn more about why they're becoming extinct in the wild. And then they are increasingly funding research in the countries where the animals come from, and conservation programs there.
So you're saying then that also that zoo animals are really ambassadors for their cousins in the wild?
That's exactly right. You know, people say, what do I think of zoos? Well, obviously, the best place for the animal is in the wild, in a protected area, but the protected areas are getting scarcer and scarcer, and so many animals in the wild are living lives of tension, and, you know, they're continually exposed to hunting.
We're still seeing some neurotic behavior of wild animals in zoos. And is that lessening as you mentioned, natural habitats within the exhibits improve and mental stimulation of the animals is employed? Is that what's causing the neurosis to level off?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, in the old days, there were so many places where chimpanzees, for example, would paint their walls with feces. And as we introduced our Jane Goodall Institute Chimpanzee program, which really has a very powerful aim of improving the environments for captive chimps, that kind of behavior we saw less frequently. There was less rocking, this kind of stereotypic behavior. There'll probably always be some, even in the wild, there's some neurotic behavior.
Do you think there's any species of animals that simply should not be in zoos today?
Yeah, I think elephants shouldn't be in zoos. I mean, elephants just aren't designed for zoos unless you've got a huge area, like some of these elephant sanctuaries. And I do not think dolphins belong in zoos. I cannot bear to see them in there. Even if it's a big aquarium, I don't think it's right. And sometimes animals like wolves that really need to run, wild dogs and so forth, I don't think they belong in zoos either, unless they can have a really, really good environment.
How would you characterize the role of veterinary care with zoo animals today?
The zoo vets are actually beginning to play an important role in veterinary work in the wild, and there is some training of vets by zoos. And by the way, also the zoos are training keepers from developing country zoos, so they're playing a role in that too. And I think the zoo vets are doing a lot of research, which is definitely beneficial for caring for wild animals as well as those in zoos.
Of course, a lot of their role now is geriatric medicine. These animals are living longer, and they're learning more about how to keep animals in captivity. From your perspective, that's all good news, is it not?
That's all good news, yes. And, you know, the sad thing is in this day and age, there are still so many horrible wayside zoos and roadside zoos, whatever. And you know, zoos which just haven't got it or just can't afford the money. If they can't afford to do it right, they shouldn't be doing it, and the zoos should close.
So some of our better zoos, obviously, are connecting more people to the natural environment of animals. But are people donating more to international conservation programs as a result of going to their neighborhood zoo?
I would say in some cases, yes. And of course, some zoos run tours and they take their zoo members out to see the animals in the wild. And I think everybody who's been out and seen how animals should be is going to feel more prepared to contribute something to help save them.
As a one world universe, how do we maintain biodiversity where natural habitat continue to shrink year after year?
With difficulty. I think, for example, around the Gombe National Park, where I've been studying chimpanzees, that research is now nearly 50 years old. And there was a time 16 years ago when outside the park there was no biodiversity. All the trees are gone. There was nothing. But by developing a program to help the local people to improve their lives in an environmentally sustainable way, especially working with women, tree planting and so forth, the villagers are now leaving aside some of their land to regenerate, which will hopefully provide corridors for the chimps to move out, because they were trapped on a sort of island of forest, and interact with other remnant groups. And this is encouraging the return of biodiversity. So with some life forms, I think you can have humans and animals living together. The problem comes when you get animals that can be potentially dangerous, when you have animals like elephants that are so big that just by living they're destructive. And this is where it becomes really, really difficult. And, you know, so of course we are losing biodiversity in many places. And again, education, helping the local people, improving their lives, making them feel better about it. Otherwise, they're not going to care about conservation. They're going to care about health and education and clean water. And once they've got those things, then perhaps they can turn around and say, okay, yeah, we get it. We do need this biodiversity. We understand if we cut these trees down, it's going to harm the watershed, and that's going to harm us. And so it's a question of including the local people in the whole equation. And in each area, it's going to be different what we can do to help preserve biodiversity. And it'll be a sad day if biodiversity is preserved only in zoos.
True. I want to return to zoos for a moment. What do you think of these large animal parks like the San Diego Wild Animal Park? Is that something that is an alternative? Is that something that zoos should become, just simply having more acreage of land for animals to roam?
Well, it's certainly the answer for some of the animals. I mean, if you must have an elephant in captivity, you have to give him and her a large enough space to travel around. Otherwise, it's just dreadful and so forth. But yeah, I think zoos should be going for the larger spaces. And if they can't, and if they genuinely care, it's a question of having a very imaginative understanding of the needs of a particular animal species. Chimps, for example, they have a big range in the wild. We can't give them the kind of range they have in the wild. But if you arrange the things in their exhibit right, you can, for example, build platforms 4 stories high. Oh, say the zoo community, they might fall. Well, they might fall, but must we subject chimps to the same kind of restrictions we now restrict our children to because of the danger of suing or something? You know, there are accidents in the wild. And I've seen zoos in Japan and research stations with these 4-story towers with platforms and ropes and tires, and they love it. So they can't roam for miles, but they can go up, they can look out over the area, they can play up there, they learn gymnastic skills.
So is that part of the way zoos will look 50 years from now? What other kinds of changes do you see with zoos if you did look in the future?
Well, I hope to see more of that kind of thing, and more zoos that are not appropriate either change or disappear, because I think a bad zoo is a really bad educational model for kids. I mean, to see an animal sitting in a small cage with nothing to do does not give the impression of this vivid, you know, being, this being where each individual is a personality. They can't really show that in these cramped conditions.
My last question is this: how do you inspire people to save animals on this planet?
Sometimes it's as simple as creating a situation where they can sit and look into an animal's eyes. That tends to really change the way people think. But the way that I use is telling stories, telling people about some extraordinary things that have happened with different kinds of animals, reaching into their imagination. I mean, will we ever know what it's like to be a humpbacked whale deep down in the depths of the dark ocean, communicating with that haunting song? What will that be like? We'll probably never know. But I think once people can not only understand, but be excited by the fact that we are part of this amazing animal kingdom. We're an animal too. And once we realize there isn't a sharp line dividing us from the others, have people, even if they can't actually physically look into the eyes, somehow create a situation with, I don't know, video, virtual reality, whatever you can do. But looking into the eyes of any animal makes a difference.
So are you optimistic with what you see in the future?
I'm optimistic if we can get together and each do our part. That's the big if. That's why I spend 300 days a year traveling, developing our youth program, Roots and Shoots, trying to create generations of young people who understand this world isn't just about money. It's the huge economic forces and the threat, this litigious society, these two things together that are, bode ill for the future, and we have to find a way to overcome them.